The Krathar were known as the undefeated conquerors of the galaxy. They had crushed hundreds of civilizations, reduced planets to ashes, and enslaved entire species without breaking a sweat. Their massive war fleets traveled from one system to another, bringing destruction wherever they went. No planet had ever resisted them. No army had ever survived their first attack. They were the ultimate force of war, unstoppable and merciless. Now their eyes turned to a small blue planet called Earth. From their flagship, High Commander Vakor stood tall, gazing at the holographic display of Earth. His red eyes glowed with amusement as he observed the planet's details. "A weak, primitive world," he muttered. "No planetary defenses, no real space fleet. This will be over in a single cycle." The Krathar warlords around him laughed. They had faced so-called strong civilizations before, only to watch them crumble in terror. This planet would be no different. "All ships, prepare for planetary assault," Vakor ordered. Thousands of warships moved into position, their weapons charged, their landing crafts ready to descend. The invasion was about to begin. The first sign of trouble. The Krathar fleet entered Earth's orbit, expecting no resistance. However, something strange happened. Their advanced scanners, which had worked perfectly in every war, suddenly failed. They could not get accurate readings on Earth's cities, military bases, or even its weather patterns. "Commander, our systems are experiencing interference," one of the officers reported. "Interference? From where?" Vakor demanded. We don't know. It's coming from the planet itself. It's like Earth is, blocking our signals." Vakor's eyes narrowed. No planet had ever done this before. It was impossible. Planets don't fight back. Only civilizations do. And this one wasn't even advanced enough to leave its own solar system. "Deploy scout ships," Vakor ordered. "We will locate their defenses manually." But as the scout ships entered the atmosphere, something terrifying happened. Earth strikes back. The moment the Krathar scouts descended, their ships began to fail. Their engines stuttered, their communication systems went silent, and their pilots struggled to maintain control. Within seconds, some ships started falling from the sky, crashing into oceans, forests, and mountains. "Commander, we are losing scout units. We don't know why." Vakor slammed his fist onto the control panel. "Planets don't do this. They don't attack ships without weapons. They don't interfere with navigation." Something was wrong with Earth. Then, without warning, a massive electromagnetic pulse, EMP, surged from the planet. The entire Krathar fleet flickered for a moment as their shields and communication networks struggled to compensate. Earth had just hit them with an invisible attack. "What is this sorcery?" one of the warlords growled. Vakor gritted his teeth. "It's not sorcery. It's an attack." But from what? The descent begins. Despite the strange interference, the Krathar army was ready for battle. With a single command, thousands of landing ships launched from the war fleet, streaking towards Earth's surface like a storm of fire. Their warriors were elite. Their weapons could destroy entire cities in minutes. Their armor was built to withstand even the strongest alien attacks. No species had ever survived a ground battle against the Krathar. As they descended through the clouds, they expected to see terrified humans running for their lives. They expected to hear screams, explosions, and chaos. But instead, they saw nothing. The cities below were quiet. Streets were empty. There were no people, no resistance. It was as if the entire human race had vanished before the first shot was fired. The Krathar warlords exchanged uneasy glances. This was not normal. "This is a trick," Vakor muttered. "The humans are hiding, but it won't save them." The landing ships touched down, and thousands of Krathar warriors stormed into the empty cities, weapons raised, scanners active. Something was wrong. The silence was unnatural. And then, the first explosion shook the ground. The trap is sprung. From the moment the Krathar landed, Earth was ready for them. The first attack came in the form of hidden explosives, placed strategically in key locations. Entire buildings collapsed on top of invading forces. Roads split apart, sending alien tanks crashing into deep pits. Bridges were destroyed, cutting off their paths. The battlefield was already prepared before they arrived. Then came the weather. A massive hurricane struck one of the landing zones, flipping heavy Krathar walkers like toys. Lightning storms ignited fuel supplies, causing massive chain explosions. In the mountains, a sudden avalanche buried an entire regiment under tons of ice and snow. The Krathar had fought wars on countless worlds, but never against the planet itself. The humans strike back. As the Krathar struggled to regroup, the real attack began. From the shadows, human forces struck with precision. Snipers eliminated command officers before they could issue orders. Drones carrying explosives slammed into Krathar vehicles, turning them into flaming wrecks. Human soldiers, moving in small but highly trained teams, engaged in hit-and-run tactics, never staying in one place long enough for the aliens to retaliate. Vakor, watching from his command ship, finally understood. Earth wasn't weak. Earth was the deadliest battlefield they had ever stepped on. The first defeat in history. Within hours, the unstoppable Krathar were in chaos. Their forces were scattered, their weapons were failing, and their soldiers were trapped in an unfamiliar war unlike anything they had faced before. They had thought Earth would be another easy conquest. But now, for the first time in their history, the Krathar were losing. The Krathar had never known fear. They had crushed empires, burned planets, and erased entire species from existence without hesitation. But Earth was different. Their mighty war machines, built to conquer the harshest worlds, struggled against the unpredictable terrain. Their elite warriors, trained for direct combat, couldn't even find an enemy to fight. The invasion had barely begun, yet the Krathar were already on the defensive. High Commander Vakor stood aboard his flagship, his red eyes narrowing at the reports coming in from the ground. "Our forces are in disarray," one of his officers reported. "Landing sites Alpha through Gamma have been compromised. We are facing environmental hazards." Vakor clenched his fists. "Hazards?" He spat the word like an insult. "You mean primitive weather?" The officer hesitated. "It is more than that, Commander. The planet itself is fighting us. Earth's first defense. Nature itself. The Krathar had conquered countless worlds, but Earth was unlike any planet they had ever encountered. Its terrain shifted unpredictably, turning what should have been easy landings into death traps. Landing Zone Alpha was meant to be a secure deployment area, but the forests swallowed their units whole. Trees taller than anything they had seen blocked their scanners, and thick, tangled vines ensnared their walkers. A few soldiers disappeared into the dense foliage, their screams echoing through the comms before going silent. Landing Zone Beta was a desert, expected to be an easy march. But within hours, sandstorms kicked up with violent fury, blinding the Krathar forces and burying their equipment under tons of shifting dunes. Landing Zone Gamma, positioned in the mountains, faced sudden avalanches. Entire platoons of Krathar warriors were buried beneath tons of ice and rock before they could even react. The planet wasn't just an enemy, it was a perfectly designed battlefield. And the Krathar were walking into a trap. Where were the humans? Despite their struggles, the Krathar still had overwhelming power. They had landed millions of soldiers and deployed war machines that could level entire cities. But there was a problem. There was no one to fight. Cities were empty. Military bases were abandoned. There were no civilians, no soldiers, no resistance. It was as if the entire human race had vanished. Vakor scowled as he watched the live footage from the battlefield. "Where are they?" he growled. "They should be fighting. They should be running." Instead, the humans had simply disappeared. And then, the attacks began. The invisible war begins. At exactly the same time, across every landing zone, the Krathar began losing soldiers. Not in open battle, not in direct combat, but in the shadows. At landing zone Alpha, Crathor squads vanished without a sound. Patrols sent into the forests never returned. Drones captured blurry figures moving among the trees, only for the footage to cut out suddenly. At landing zone Beta, the sandstorms carried something more than just sand, hidden explosives, detonating beneath the feet of the marching Crathor. Tanks disappeared into sinkholes, and soldiers fell into underground tunnels, only for the tunnels to collapse behind them, sealing them in the darkness. At landing zone Gamma, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, swarmed the skies, dropping precision-guided missiles on exposed command posts. Snipers, hidden among the rocks, picked off high-ranking Crathor leaders with terrifying accuracy. The Crathor commanders screamed in frustration. They had come expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they were being hunted like animals. Vakor's realization. Back on the Crathor flagship, Vakor stared at the reports in stunned silence. The humans weren't fighting like any species they had encountered before. They were fighting like ghosts. They weren't trying to win through sheer numbers or firepower. They were erasing the Crathor piece by piece, attacking their supply lines, disrupting their communications, and breaking their morale. Vakor clenched his jaw. "This is not a battle," he muttered. "This is a slaughter." For the first time in history, the invincible Crathor were facing an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't control. And Vakor finally understood. Earth was not just another world. It was a death trap. And the humans were the real predators. The Crathor High Command had always prided itself on its military strength. They had conquered over 100 planets, crushed every species that resisted, and rewritten history with their dominance. But now, on Earth, they were losing soldiers faster than they could track. And the worst part, they still hadn't seen a single human. Vakor paced inside his war chamber, his red eyes burning with frustration as reports flooded in from the surface. His once mighty invasion force was in chaos. His warriors, who had never feared anything in their lives, were hesitating, looking over their shoulders, expecting death at any moment. "This is impossible," one of his generals hissed. "There is no organized resistance, no standing army, no battlefield. We are fighting shadows." Vakor gritted his teeth. "No, we are being hunted. The terrors in the night." In the forests, the Crathor patrols were reduced to whispers in the dark. Soldiers vanished one by one. Some were dragged into the shadows, leaving only bloodstains behind. Others collapsed, their armor pierced by silent, precise shots. Even the elite Crathor night warriors, trained to hunt in the darkness, were being picked off like prey. At landing zone Beta, the once proud war convoys had turned into graveyards. Their massive tanks, built for planetary sieges, had fallen into deep pits, traps disguised as natural terrain. Soldiers had unknowingly walked into minefields, their armor proving useless against the sheer force of the hidden explosives. On the mountains, the Crathor snipers found themselves outmatched. Their long-range scopes revealed nothing, until they themselves were silently taken out, one by one. Missiles rained down from unseen locations, turning their fortified positions into smoldering ruins. Everywhere the Crathor turned, there was only death and silence. Technology meant nothing. The Crathor were armed with the most advanced war machines in the galaxy. Their energy shields could withstand planetary bombardments. Their battle armor was impenetrable against most weapons. Their war drones could track life forms from miles away. But none of it was working. Crathor drones were being hacked, turning against their own forces. Their vehicles were shutting down, disabled by EMP blasts they couldn't trace. Their supply lines were severed, cutting off food, ammunition, and reinforcements. They were being dismantled piece by piece, and still, they had not found a single human army. The psychological war. Panic spread through the Crathor ranks. Fear, an emotion they had never known, was now consuming them. They began firing at shadows, shooting at anything that moved. Their own soldiers mistook each other for enemies, turning their weapons on their own ranks in blind terror. At night, the whispers began. Some soldiers claimed they heard voices, strange, distorted voices, mocking them in their own language. Others reported seeing figures standing just at the edge of their vision, only for them to disappear when they turned to look. Sleep-deprived, paranoid, and broken, the once mighty Krathar warriors were losing their minds. Vakur's breaking point. On the Krathar flagship, Vakur slammed his fist against the command console. "We are the greatest warriors in the galaxy," he growled. "How are we losing to nothing?" His advisors were silent. They had no answers. And then, a new transmission appeared on the war screen. For the first time since the invasion began, a human face appeared. It was a single soldier, clad in black combat gear, his face calm and expressionless. Vakur stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. "Who are you?" he demanded. The human tilted his head slightly. Then, in a voice cold and merciless, he replied, "You are in our world now." And then the feed cut to black. The realization, silence filled the war chamber. For the first time, Vakur felt something he had never felt before. Not frustration, not anger, dread. Because at that moment, he understood the truth. The humans had never been running. They had never been hiding. They had been waiting. And now, the real war was about to begin. The Krathar war machine was in shambles. Their forces were trapped, terrified, and torn apart piece by piece. The mightiest army in the galaxy, the same one that had crushed entire civilizations, was being reduced to nothing. And they still hadn't fought a single human army. But that was about to change. Because the humans had decided it was time to stop hiding. The battlefield of fear. At landing zone Alpha, the forests that swallowed Krathar troops were now alive with movement. Thermal scanners detected hundreds of figures, but the images made no sense. The figures were cold, almost invisible, blending into the environment like ghosts. The only warning the Krathar had was a whisper on their comms, before gunfire erupted from every direction. The humans were here, but they weren't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like hunters. At landing zone Beta, the sandstorms cleared just enough to reveal something worse. Hundreds of unmanned drones, hovering silently, weapons locked on every exposed Krathar target. Before the warriors could react, the sky lit up. Explosions tore through their formations, vaporizing heavy armor, obliterating command posts, and leaving no room for escape. At landing zone Gamma, the mountain strongholds of the Krathar turned into death traps. Explosives detonated along the rocky cliffs, collapsing entire ridges and sending entire squads tumbling to their deaths. The snipers who once hunted humans now found themselves hunted instead, taken out by shots they never saw coming. The Krathar invasion force, once numbering in the millions, was now scattered, leaderless, and broken. And then, the humans spoke again. The message that broke the Krathar. The Krathar command frequencies were hijacked. Every warship, every officer, every soldier heard the same voice, the same calm, ruthless voice that had spoken to Vakur before. "Your invasion is over." The words cut through the chaos like a knife. "You came to this world expecting a battle, but there was never a battle. There was only a hunt, and you were the prey." Silence. On every battlefield, the Krathar warriors who had never known fear felt terror unlike anything before. The voice continued, emotionless and cold. "We never ran. We never hid. We were simply waiting, calculating, studying you." The Krathar soldiers looked around in panic, realizing the horrifying truth. The humans had been watching them from the start. Every step the Krathar had taken, every order they had given, every strategy they had tried. The humans had predicted it all. And now they were cleaning up the mess. The final stand. On his flagship, Vakur stood frozen, his claws digging into the metal console. His army was gone. His fleet was scattered. And the humans were still coming. "Commander," an officer gasped. We must retreat." Vakor wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to fight. But deep inside he knew they had already lost. For the first time in Krathar history, the greatest war machine in the galaxy was retreating. And the humans weren't even chasing them. They just watched as the once mighty Krathar fled like cowards, leaving behind their dead, their weapons, and the ruins of their shattered pride. Because Earth had never been just another planet to conquer. It was a trap. And the Krathar had walked right into it. The Krathar fleet was in full retreat. Their once mighty warships, designed to burn entire worlds, were fleeing like frightened animals. The great Vakor, leader of the invasion, sat in silence aboard his flagship, watching as the battle reports came in. Or rather, the massacre reports. His warriors, the strongest in the galaxy, had been hunted down like prey. The humans had never engaged in direct war. They had turned Earth into a killing ground, forcing the Krathar to fight shadows until they broke. And now, the survivors were running. But something was wrong. The doors were closing. Vakor clenched his claws as he turned to his navigation officer. "What's our status?" The officer hesitated, his pale blue scales twitching with unease. "Our forces are retreating. But, Commander," he gulped, "the humans are not pursuing us." Vakor narrowed his eyes. "That's a good thing." The officer shook his head. "No, it's not. It means they don't have to." Vakor's breath hitched. He turned toward the holographic map of the solar system, and his blood ran cold. Something was happening. The ambush in space. The Krathar had expected a clean escape. Their fleet was faster, their warships equipped with hyperspace drives that could tear them away from this cursed system in an instant. But the drives weren't activating. One after another, reports flooded in from the retreating warships. "Hyperspace disruption detected. Something's blocking our jump drives. Our long-range sensors are blind. We can't navigate." It took only seconds for the realization to sink in. The humans had planned for this. They weren't letting the Krathar leave. And that's when the attack began. Nowhere to run. Explosions ripped through the fleet as hidden human warships decloaked. They had been waiting, perfectly positioned, perfectly silent, invisible until the Krathar walked right into their trap. Laser fire tore through the Krathar battleships before they could even raise their shields. The humans didn't fight like warriors. They fought like assassins, their shots precise, their attacks calculated, striking at the weakest points of the Krathar vessels. Entire war cruisers detonated in blinding flashes of light. The mighty Krathar fleet, once feared across the stars, was being erased from existence. And then, the broadcast came. The final message. The human voice returned, echoing across the Krathar channels. "Calm, cold, ruthless. You thought you were retreating." Vakor's claws trembled. "But you were never running away. You were walking into our trap." Silence. The officer turned to Vakor, his scales now pale with horror. "Commander, what do we do?" Vakor couldn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew. There was no way out. The humans had never been defending Earth. They had been hunting the Krathar from the very start. And now, the hunt was almost over. The Krathar fleet, once the pride of the war empire, was dying in silence. Vakor watched in horror as one warship after another was torn apart. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like predators. They struck without warning, without hesitation, and without mercy. Every escape route was blocked. Every Krathar vessel that tried to flee was hunted down and destroyed. The once invincible armada of the Krathar had become a floating graveyard. The trap tightens. On the bridge of his flagship, Vakor's voice trembled as he shouted at his officers, "Find a way out. Now." The navigation officer's scales were pale, his voice weak. "Commander, there is no way out." Vakor slammed his clawed fist against the console. There has to be. But the holographic map of the battlefield told the truth. The human warships had surrounded them in a perfect formation. It wasn't random. It wasn't desperate. It was calculated. Every ship in the exact right position, leaving only one possibility: total annihilation. A cold realization struck Vakor. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a slaughter. The weapon that ended it all. The final horror arrived. A new human warship appeared on the battlefield. But this one was different. It was massive, far larger than anything Vakor had seen before. It moved slowly, almost casually, as if there was no rush. And then, it fired a single shot. One beam of energy, brighter than a sun, cut across space, and an entire Krathar warcruiser simply vanished. Not exploded, not damaged. Gone. Every Krathar officer froze in terror. What? What is that weapon? One whispered. No one had an answer, because no one had ever survived it before. The final plea. Vakor's claws trembled over the communication controls. He had one option left: surrender. Open a channel to the humans, he growled. The screen flickered, and the same human voice from before answered. Calm, cold, emotionless. Surrender, the human repeated. After everything you've done. Vakor's chest tightened. He had expected them to negotiate, to show mercy. But the humans were not like other species. There would be no surrender, only justice. Vakor closed his eyes. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were sending a message to the entire galaxy. And soon, everyone would hear it. The Krathar fleet was no more. The once mighty warships, designed to bring terror to the stars, were now nothing but wreckage, floating lifelessly in the cold void. Fires raged in the remains of broken hulls, and the silence of space was only disturbed by the final desperate distress signals from ships that no longer had a crew to respond. Vakor stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship, watching his people die. The humans hadn't just won. They had erased the Krathar invasion force from existence. No mercy left. The massive human warship, the one that had fired the devastating beam, hovered silently in the distance. It did not fire again. It didn't have to. The battle was already over. Vakor's communication officer turned toward him, his voice weak. Commander, incoming transmission. A flickering hologram appeared before them. It was a human, but not a general, not an admiral, not a soldier. It was a civilian, a simple man in a business suit, sitting behind a desk, as if he were making an announcement on a news broadcast. The final warning. The human adjusted his tie and looked directly at the camera. When he spoke, there was no emotion in his voice. To the leaders of the Krathar Empire, he said. Vakor felt his blood turn to ice. You sent an armada to conquer our world. You believed we were weak. You believed we would beg for mercy. The man leaned forward slightly. Now, your fleet is gone. Silence. The human continued. We are not conquerors. We do not seek war. But if you ever send your kind to our home again. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then, with absolute finality, he said, we will not stop at your fleet. We will come for your homeworld next. The message cut off. The transmission ended. And for the first time in his life, Vakor felt something he had never known before. The human warships began to retreat. They didn't need to fire another shot. They didn't chase the survivors. They simply let the wreckage drift, knowing that the story of this battle would spread across the stars. The Krathar had come to conquer. Instead, they had been destroyed. And the survivors, few and broken, were left to carry a message back to their empire. The Emperor's horror. Weeks later, deep within the Krathar homeworld, Emperor Xalroth sat on his throne, watching the recorded footage from the doomed invasion. His claws tightened. His tail twitched with unease. He had never feared another species before. Not the Reloth, not the Vasheri, not the millions of weak civilizations that had fallen before the Krathar war machine. But now, His greatest fleet had vanished in an instant. His greatest warriors had fled in terror. And the humans, they did not gloat. They did not demand tribute. They had simply sent a warning. A single message that now echoed through the halls of the Krathar Empire. If you come for us again, we will come for you. The new balance of power. The galaxy changed that day. The Krathar, once feared by all, became a shadow of their former strength. Their invasions slowed. Their war fleets hesitated. For the first time in history, the Krathar Empire looked to the stars and knew there was a world they dared not touch. And across the galaxy, the message spread. A new power had awakened, a species that did not seek war, but would end it without mercy if provoked. A species that had turned an invasion into a massacre. The galaxy had laughed at Earth. Now, the galaxy knew fear.